So let's talk about one of the strangest stories in modern conservation. We're going to the Florida Everglades, where a massive, multi-million-dollar project went catastrophically and, as you'll see, brilliantly wrong. It's a wild ride, and it might just change how you think about fighting invasive species forever.
And that's the thing, right? That's the crazy paradox we're going to unpack here. How could a plan that was, by all accounts, a complete and total disaster also end up being the biggest breakthrough in a war that had been going on for decades? It doesn't make sense until it does. All right, so let's start at the beginning, or what everyone thought was the end. Let's talk about this high-tech failure and how the perfect bait ended up catching the absolute wrong predator.
Okay, so here was the plan, and it sounds like something straight out of a movie. Scientists built this whole army of super realistic robotic rabbits. And I mean, they went all out. These things were designed to perfectly mimic a python's favorite meal, right down to radiating a 99-degree body heat and even puffing out a synthetic rabbit musk. And get this, they weren't cheap. Each one of these robo-bunnies cost $4,000 to build. They made 120 of them. That's nearly $500,000 of taxpayer money, banking on the idea that these high-tech decoys could finally give us an edge.
But the swamp had other plans. The robots worked a little too well. Just 3 days after they put them out there, the whole project went completely off the rails. It turns out alligators, the python's ancient enemy, found these easy meals first, and they began to systematically hunt down and literally crush the expensive robots into scrap metal. It wasn't just a failure, it was a multi-million-dollar alligator buffet.
Now, to understand why Florida would even try something so wild, we've got to back up and look at just how desperate the situation had become. The Everglades, this incredible, vast river of grass, was literally being choked to death in silence.
You know, this whole mess was a man-made problem. It started back in the 80s with the exotic pet trade, but then came the 1-2 punch. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through the area and just demolished reptile breeding facilities, letting who knows how many snakes escape into the wild. And in the warm, wet paradise of the Everglades, with nothing to hunt them, their population just exploded.
And when I say exploded, I mean look at these numbers. It's truly terrifying. The effect on the local food web was catastrophic. In the areas where pythons took over mammal populations, we're talking raccoons, opossums, marsh rabbits, they didn't just decline, they plummeted by over 90%. They were effectively wiped out. And this is the engine driving the whole disaster. A single female can lay up to 100 eggs at a time. 100. When you think about that math, you realize you're not just fighting snakes, you are fighting an unstoppable exponential wave of them. So as you can imagine, for years, officials were just throwing everything they could at this problem. It was a long, slow, and for the most part, a completely losing battle. I mean, they tried it all. They started with these big public hunts, the Python Challenge, which was really more of a PR event than a real solution. Then they brought in professional hunters, but that was incredibly expensive and barely made a dent. They got clever and used radio-tagged Judas snakes to lead them to others, and even brought in highly trained scent dogs. And look, each idea worked a little, but nothing could be scaled up to solve a problem across 1.5 million acres. The place is just too big. This desperation led them to a really controversial experiment. They tried using live rabbits in protected pens as bait. And guess what? It worked perfectly. Pythons were drawn in like a magnet. But as you can probably guess, the public outcry over animal cruelty was immediate and fierce. The program got shut down fast. But it left them with one crucial piece of information. Scent was the key. They just had no ethical way to use it. And that is what led them to build a better bait.
Okay, so let's get back to that pile of crushed gator-chewed robots. Just as everyone was about to pull the plug on this whole embarrassing disaster, a young data analyst who was poring over the wreckage noticed something in the data that everybody else had missed. And this, right here, is where the entire story completely flips on its head. This analyst asks a radical question. What if the robots weren't designed to actually capture snakes? What if their destruction was part of the plan all along? Because here was the secret. The robots weren't just bait. They were spies. In their very short lives before getting destroyed, each one was a little mobile data station.
It was logging everything: the time of day, the temperature of every encounter, thermal images, motion-triggered camera footage of every animal that went by. They were secretly building a massive database on how predators moved through the Everglades. And this hidden data would let them do something nobody thought was possible. It would let them stop just hunting the pythons and start hacking the invasion itself. So they took all of that data, every single gator attack, every thermal image, and they fed it into a powerful AI. And the AI found a pattern that no human ever could have seen. The pythons weren't just moving randomly. No, they were actively using these hidden highways through the swamp, specifically to avoid alligators. By tracking the gators, the robots had accidentally mapped the python's fear.
And this just brilliantly shows the shift in thinking. The old way was totally passive, right? You just sit and wait for a snake to wander into your trap. The new way, armed with the AI's predictions, was proactive. They could go on offense. They could intercept the snakes on the very routes they used when they thought they were safe.
The results were immediate and staggering. The AI predicted the movements of the big breeding females, leading hunters straight to their nests. In just 1 month, they found and removed thousands of eggs. That's more potential pythons than had been captured in the entire previous year. For the first time ever, they were attacking the invasion at its source. All that failure, all those crush robots, all that money, it was all worth it. The project that everyone called a disaster had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They had, as one source put it, stumbled backward into something huge. They had hacked the invasion. But this incredible victory, right, achieved through AI and predictive hunting, it opens up a much bigger and honestly, a much more uncomfortable conversation. It forces us to look at this moral puzzle that sits at the very heart of modern conservation. And it's this strange, difficult irony of our time. In the name of saving life, we often find ourselves forced to take it. And look, this is not just a Florida problem. Around the entire world, we are facing the same dilemma: culling gray squirrels in Britain to save the native red ones, killing feral cats in Australia to protect native birds, spearing invasive lionfish in the Caribbean to save coral reefs. In every single one of these cases, we are forced to decide which lives are worth saving. Which really brings us to our final question. When we intervene like this, whether it's with a robot rabbit or a government hunt, are we truly restoring some kind of natural balance? Or are we just enforcing the version of nature that we happen to prefer? It's the uncomfortable truth that so often we are both the hero and the executioner in nature's story.